Episode 92 of the Fired Coaches podcast. For those in Wisconsin, that would be great Reggie White, number 92. So we got Coach Dodson here talking some football. He's the associate head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach at Stetson down in Florida. He's been nominated for assistant coach of the year. He's been at a lot of different stops, which we'll get into here shortly. But I was just telling him off air that I just watched the virtual tour of Stetson, and I'm ready to commit. It seems like a really cool spot. So, Coach Dodson, appreciate you taking some time to sit down on the podcast.
Well, hey, Stetson welcomes you. Once again, it's beautiful down here. We're not too far from the beach, so if you like the water, come on and hang out with us down here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Obviously, you just transitioned down there. We're just kind of getting caught up a little bit here. I guess going back to, obviously you grew up in Cali. You did some junior college things before you went and finished your playing career at South Dakota. Initial start coaching college football as a GA at South Dakota as well, too. So, kind of take us back to yesteryear of those playing days for the Coyotes and what it was like kind of getting your start as a GA there.
All right. So, I'm originally from California, born and raised in the Compton-Carson area, went up to Palmdale, and after playing, went to Antelope Valley Junior College and was kind of stuck. And really 6 days before I got the phone call, I didn't know where I was going to be at South Dakota. Coach Steve Standard, who's a linebacker coach at Minnesota, called me up and said, "Hey, you want to come to South Dakota?" I'm like, "I don't know." But he said, "We got a dome." I said, "I'm there. You got a dome." and so went up to South Dakota, had a great time. I was with some really good coaches. That whole I-29 area of coaching is really good. When you think about where a lot of really good coaches come from, that whole I-29 area is pretty special. Right after I got done playing, I met my lifelong best friends, my wife, who I've been married to for 25 years. That all accumulated, that all came together. And that was my experience. And I said, I want to jump right into coaching. And was able to coach some of my very best friends, which was pretty strange at the time, right? We were just playing together and hanging out together. And now I'm coaching them and telling them to do laps. But I was around Coach John Austin, who had just came from Iowa, and he was there with Hayden Fry, and he was able to teach, and we learned, what they were doing over there at Iowa. And was able to get my first coaching gig and was very blessed to be able to GA at my alma mater.
It's always been interesting to me since you brought it up about the dome in that, North Dakota, South Dakota, and North Dakota State all have the domes, but South Dakota State doesn't. So it's always been interesting to me that way that, SDSU doesn't, but the other ones do. I guess just talk about, obviously you talked about meeting your wife there, spending time there. You actually came back around as well too, if I'm not mistaken, and ended up starting your career for the first time on the defensive side of the ball as a defensive coordinator there. So just what is South Dakota in obviously being a player, being a GA, getting your feet wet, and then coming back and spending some time on both sides of the ball with it kind of ending there as a defensive coordinator, what that's all really meant to you from that football program?
It means everything. Like, we were South Dakota through and through, and everything, especially at the time of my life, what it gave me and how that area and the culture of the Midwest, what it influenced, this young man that was from Los Angeles, and how it developed the work ethic, how meeting people from, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and that enrichment of the American spirit and the culture. And I was blown away. I always say, in South Dakota and Vermilion, people wave at you. When in LA, they wave at you. You kind of get suspicious. So, but being able to go back to South Dakota, and we had some incredible teams there. We had a bunch of NFL guys. We won a lot. A bunch of coaches had a bunch of kids, and we're still very close together. And it was just a magical time. And I was able to go from defense, because I played defense, to offense. And I was with Coach Glenn Caruso. Ed Meyercourt was our head coach at that time. And we broke just about every school record that we did, and had a lot of success. And then fortunately, I had an opportunity to go be the defensive coordinator for South Dakota in our first Division I year, because we transitioned from D2 to Division I. And we had a bunch of success. I got a chance to coach my younger brother, who was MVP of our defense. And then from there, I had got a call from a mentor, Fred Reed, who has recently passed away, and said, "Hey, you know what? We got this opportunity for you to come coach with the legend, Turner Gill at Buffalo. Are you interested?" And my head coach and my wife was like, "You get on the first thing going." And so South Dakota took me from there to Buffalo.
So what's it like? Because I think you bring up a really good point too. Growing up in Compton, as you mentioned, being a California guy, being like Dakota is like all I'm thinking of is cold, right, in your mind. And then you said we got a dome. So what's it like being from Compton and literally polar opposite of the world, going and working in the Dakotas, obviously playing there. But what does that meant with just kind of like your branch of long term of developing relationships with people where it's like, you can talk to anybody, right? Like you're talking to somebody in Vermilion who's waving at you, who's probably on a tractor, and then you're in Compton. Like just kind of talk about what that's meant for your development of your career as you've gone through all your different stops.
Well, I mean, at that time of your life, you're 19, 20 years old. So you only know so much, right, of your life. And then you get a chance to get exposed. And once again, it was the people, it was the culture that welcomed me. I didn't want to stay. That was not the plan to stay. It was there to get in, play football, and then leave. But I just fell in love with the environment. And I fell in love not only with my wife, but just what the people were all about. And I started to relate to, the Midwest work ethic and the Midwest culture. And what the school was able to continue to pour into me, kept giving me opportunity after opportunity. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave back. I wanted to make sure that I was also was able to be blessed to bring up my younger brother to come to South Dakota so he can get the experience. I had three best friends that I was able to recruit to South Dakota, and they were able to get incredible degrees and then grow as people. And that was one of the things that I really started to brand my early career, not only being really good at coaching defense, but being able to go back to California and go bring some really good football players here to South Dakota and help grow that program. But I knew what I was really doing was really giving guys from back in my neighborhood in Compton, Carson, and Palmdale to come out here and then give them an opportunity to grow within themselves. So it was a win-win situation, and I feel so blessed to be able to have that opportunity.
No, I love that. That's awesome. Since we're talking about the North, obviously you can go a little bit further north after your GA. When you went up to Houghton, Michigan, up at Michigan Tech, I got a good friend, Josh Bittner. He's the head basketball coach there now, who's doing a great job, and had a best friend from high school go to Michigan Tech, and I've been up there, and it's honestly a beautiful area. So just talk about just when you think like you're going from Cali to North Dakota or South Dakota, excuse me, now you're going to even go up a little bit further, going up to Houghton, up to the tip of Michigan.
Marcus, let me tell you this. When Jarod first went up to Michigan, they put me on this little plane,
Oh
and
wow.
I had fell asleep, and I had woke up and looked out the window, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I started to panic. I'm like, am I on the right plane? How I get to the Atlantic Ocean? And I was like, whoa. And then I was like, wow, look at this. Where are we? She was like, we're flying over Lake Superior. I'm like, that's a lake? I could not believe how big those lakes were because I had never experienced that.
Right.
So that was my first understanding of getting up to Houghton. And I always said this, it was July 4th, actually July 6th, the year 2000. I had called my wife. I was like, this is so awesome. It's 75 degrees. There's no mosquitoes. I think we didn't found our metropolis. Then I say like October 28th hit and it started to snow. And Marcus, it did not stop snowing until May 16th. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what they were talking about with the snow. But once again, the people of Houghton, they welcome me. They welcome my family. My youngest daughter, Mariah, she started school there. We had started a program. Really interesting fact: Michigan Tech's football team had actually dropped the football program. They dropped the football program in 2000. I think it was 2022. Excuse me, 2002. And then, so we had to restart the football program. So we have lost a bunch of players. We restarted the football program back. We played the 23 season, struggled a little bit. And then the year I left to go to South Dakota, that team that we built in 2023 and 2020, 2003, ended up winning the conference championship in 2004.
Wow.
So it was a magical journey. I met a lot of really good people who I'm still friends today. One of my very best friends, Coach Duvendek, who coaches at Carthage. I met him during that time, and it was just such a blessing to be in Houghton. Even though it was a lot of snow, a lot of shoveling, it was still pretty awesome experience.
I always say, because I worked, my first year in coaching was at UW Superior, which is right next to Minnesota Duluth, and right off, the edge of Lake Superior there. And I always tell people that I love it because, again, just like Houghton, Michigan, being right there by Lake Superior, when you're talking about 75 degrees, 80 degrees in the summer, I don't think you can find a more beautiful place with the wind off the lake and just what that feels like. But there is a little bit of a different side to that, like you mentioned, once we start to get to those winter months as well, too. So you get both sides of it. You talk about '09, and getting that first Division I opportunity. Turner Gill, obviously a legend in the game at Buffalo. Going there, I think you helped out with special teams and a little bit with the defensive backs. Like you said, your wife's like, hey, just go. What do you remember about taking that opportunity and again, kind of getting your feet wet truly in the FBS level?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, like Turner Gill was one of the hottest names. He was supposed to be going to Auburn. They had just won their first bowl game, or they just went to the first bowl game in so long, and so I knew about him because of who he was as a Heisman finalist. And I actually, I followed one of my mentors, Fred Reed, and what they were doing success there. And it was just really out of the blue. I was recruiting down in Tampa, and Fred called me and he was like, hey, I got an opportunity. And I didn't know the impact that Coach Gill would have on my life. The elite way that he operated his football program. I was real. I mean, I was raw coming in there. I was like, oh, we have particular way that we operate. We have a fantastic way that we recruit, the evaluation process. And that's why he was able to build. Khalil Mack was on our team. I mean, we just had a lot of really good football players and a lot of really good football coaches and a lot of really good football minds. So I felt so blessed every day coming in and just learning and absorbing. Obviously, he comes from Tom Osborne and that whole tree of Nebraska of how they did things. Obviously, you can see the tree, what they did at North Dakota State and how Craig Bowl was able to come in and implement, the elite level of coaching and organization. So I was blessed to be able to be part of that.
It's amazing looking back. And again, I think obviously people know it, right? It's been well documented, but you talk about Tom Osborne and how all that came about. And like you said, from the organization and everything, and how everybody went off and did their own thing and obviously had a lot of success with it.
So he took the job at Kansas, and I remember everything about it. He brought us all together that Sunday. All the coaches were, biting their nails and wondering if they were going to go with him to Kansas. And so, he went around and he said, hey, you're going to go, you're going to go. And he actually, he had told me, he was like, Coach Dotson, I'm going to bring you up, but I can't take you up right now. You got to wait a little bit and you come up. And so it was like the longest 4 days of my life, right? Here I go. I'm about to go from South Dakota to Kansas and go be the whole deal. So he calls me up. He's like, yeah, I want you just to come up and I want you to meet our defensive coordinator and talk to him. And, it's not an interview, so don't worry about it. You're my guy. And so I'm like, whew, wipe my sweat. All right, okay, cool. I'm coming in there a little relaxed. And I go and, we meet and we talk. And I end up talking to the defensive coordinator. And the defensive coordinator was asking me a little bit more about specifics and scheme wise. And if I knew what I knew now, I would have changed my approach in the recruiting. I was talking a little bit more about what we had done instead of being a great listener and finding out what's important to the defensive coordinator. And so there was a detachment. And so what ended up happening is I didn't get to Kansas. Heart was broken. That was my first time without a job.
And first time
that was
probably going through it within the process of just, right, not being told no or whatever, right? Like not having that next where you can kind of fight through something, right?
It was definitely that was the first time having it from a career standpoint. Like, wait a minute, hold on, you're not going to take me? I'm the young guy who was assistant coach of the year finalist. I'm the young, all this good stuff, and you're not going to take me? All right, this was pretty interesting. However, my mom did a really good job of raising me to have resilience, and so when I faced other challenges in life, and this was by far not the hardest thing. But it was a challenge that I now had to take my family through. And that was the first time really as a father of four, my wife, and we don't have a job. And now we got to go through this transition. And so that was a big part of my growth and our family's growth. Like, how do we handle, the unknown?
Yeah, I guess talk about that because we have talked about that obviously a lot on this podcast, obviously with the name, but a lot of people going through that where again, normal people on the outside just don't understand, right? Like, well, you coach football. Well, what else do you do? It's like, well, I coach football. So I guess explain that, where obviously your wife's been very supportive, like you mentioned, the four kiddos, knowing what the profession kind of is, but obviously like you never want this to kind of happen. So those months, prior to, Buffalo, thinking maybe I'm going to Kansas, now I'm actually going to go to Old Dominion. Like in that time, like, was there a lot of, conversations out there, a lot of resumes, like kind of what was that process like when you were kind of in that limbo stage?
Yeah, I think one of the things that God really blessed me with is like, all right, so what can you control? And so what can I control is within my environment. I can make sure, and I teach myself, you got to have a routine because otherwise your mind is just going to keep on grasping and you're going to keep on questioning and all that good stuff. So I end up developing a routine. Get up in the morning, let's get some resumes, get some information, make some quick phone calls, do that until about 10, then go work out because you got to go burn some of those energies. So started building up the workout. And then right after the workout, I'm at Barnes and Noble, grabbing my coffee, getting back in, typing up the resume, learning and listening. And then I also put into my routine professional development. Right. How can I make sure that I'm learning and growing? And sometimes it's a little bit of football, but sometimes it's a little bit of leadership, whatever things that I can do, and then keep on communicating with my network to let them know that, hey, you know what, I'm still looking. I'm still available because you take that for granted that you think everybody knows that you're still looking, but they got lives too.
Right.
So that part was happening, and we were really, trying to build the plane as we were flying it and understanding like what this life is for us, during this time. But my wife is a trooper, Shannon. She is a trooper and just being supportive. She wasn't working at the time. I was fortunate at that particular injunction that we were going to get paid for a little bit more of extended time. So that just gave us a little bit of leeway. But I really am grateful for a lot of really good people supporting me, letting me know that I'll be able to get through it and that, this is kind of part of the profession. And so you have to learn how to navigate, these disappointments.
I love what you say about the routine there because actually we just had Coach Rick Petrie on, who was a Division I women's basketball coach at South Alabama and Jacksonville State for 26 years. And he had said how there was a coaching friend who really kind of motivated him to, hey, get up and shower, professional development, get your resume ready, make some conversations, work out, all that kind of stuff that you were touching on. And, I think to some people it's like, well, yeah, you don't have a job. Like, why wouldn't you do that? But it's like just that like constant, like, we're going to stay involved here, right? We're going to stay engaged. So I love that you said that. And it's funny too that you mentioned like, well, yeah, you think that people would know that I don't have anything, but they got lives too. It's kind of like me with the podcast. It's like, well, I'm producing these episodes. You think people will know, but it's also like, well, hell, they got a lot going on as well too. So you end up at Old Dominion and you have really, 2 great years there with Coach Wilder. I mean, you're 8-3, you're 10-3. I think that second year, and lost a crazy, what looked like, at least from a score standpoint, playoff game to Georgia Southern in the second round. So, getting back into it and having 2 great years. I mean, what was that like for you?
It was awesome. It was my first, like, so we had went to the golden triangle of what we call winter, right? So you go from South Dakota where I felt negative 76 degrees. Then we go up to the upper peninsula, right, of Michigan, where it has an average of 306 inches of snow per year. And then we go back to South Dakota before we go to Buffalo. So we've seen what winters can do. So we're pretty excited about going down south and what they did at Old Dominion because we got there in year 2 or year 1 of the program, right? It was just when they just got it started. So it was so awesome of the camaraderie of things that we were building. It was roll your sleeves up and let's go take on the world. And we were the winningest startup football program in the history. And so we had a lot of success and met one of my best friends, Andy Rondo, who ended up being the head coach at Pace, and Corey Heatherman, who's now the defensive coordinator at the University of Miami. He was our GA at the time. And so many other coaches was involved in building that program. And it was so awesome. They do a really good job of supporting football right there in the 757 area code. It's filled with talent and people that love football. So that was an awesome experience.
You've talked about, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but really coaching all over. Is there a favorite spot if you can go and you're going to find a kid that's going to fit Stetson perfectly from wherever, but you have to go to your favorite restaurant or area to recruit him? Is there a specific area that you love, to recruit because food's great there, or it's just a hotbed for talent and you've gotten a lot of kids over the years from it?
You know what? The area would be Tampa. And our head coach had sent me down to Tampa way back in like 2003. And, they love football down here in the South. And not to say that they don't love it in the Midwest. And obviously you see the Midwest grow and explode with football and talent and all that good stuff. But just talking about just a raw love for the game of football. I had related very well with the young men that I had recruited, and they're like, "Oh man, you love football just as much as I love football. We can talk football all day and all night and those type things." and the rawness of the talent, right? You can see it, you can develop it, and you can and they can blossom. So that's been a really hotbed. Of course, Southern California is where I'm from, so I have a direct connection to so many family members now and friends' kids that I can actually go out there and help make their college experience, better and bountiful and those type things. So between Florida and California, like those would be my hotbeds.
I've read, you're a very honest and transparent type guy. Is that how you've always been? Is that from an upbringing, or is that just something that you've learned over time that you feel like, hey, I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm just going to be very, bold about it for the most part, just because that's the best way to kind of go about it? Like, how have you learned that over time?
Yeah, I think when you grow up in certain areas, right? Like you have to figure out like who people are, and th- for that for me is just to be straightforward with them. And as I grew and matured and developed my leadership, is I want to take out as much gray as possible because trustworthiness allows communication to happen. It allows us to build faster, and it's just a better environment when you can just be straightforward with people. And I had to learn my skill because sometimes I don't have that medium, Marcus. I can. It's just sometimes I can just be straight up blunt and not really worry about the edges. But that was something that really developed. Being straightforward with people and being honest and once Coach Anderson really taught us. And Coach Anderson was the head coach at Michigan Tech, and he usually got his philosophy from Lou Holtz, right? And it's do what's right, do the best you can, and treat others the way you want to be treated. And you have four priorities: family and faith, education or career, the team and self, right? Once those things are all aligned and you just say, hey, if I can just keep this focused, you being true to yourself and how you relate to other people, it allows people to be free and to be themselves. So that's how I learned to develop that and being straightforward with people.
I love that. I think the less gray area is always better. And I know in today's world, that's not always easy. It's never just black and white, but I feel like the more gray area you get into, that's when things kind of get a little bit more chaotic and crazy. And, you head back to, after Old Dominion, you head back to South Dakota. You went and worked at mines at South Dakota School of Mines, which I think, again, never been to it, but seen a lot of pictures. I think that's an underrated football stadium with how the vehicles park around the field there. Was that kind of a move to get back to family and be a defensive coordinator once again?
Well, I ended up getting fired from Old Dominion, which was a whole interesting, dynamic because we had so much success and we developed, players. But my family and I, we know that God has led us to where he needs us to be and however we influence. And so we end up back in South Dakota, which was a great experience. We got a chance to work at South Dakota School of Mines. Coach Stacy Collins, who's now special teams coordinator for Boise State. Coach Zach Tinker, who's special teams coordinator for Cal, Ahmad Anan, who was the special teams coordinator at LSU. We were all together there at South Dakota School of Mines, and they had not had a winning season, Marcus, in 30 years. And so we took that program. It was going from NAIA not winning to Division II. And in our second year, we were able to get that thing changed. So it was special, once again, rolling our sleeves up, figuring out how to develop people, develop a program. And it's such a beautiful area. I'd say it's one of the most beautiful, underrated, beautiful areas out there. Obviously, everybody knows about Mount Rushmore, but they don't know about Spearfish Lake and all the wonderful waterfalls and the Badlands. It is so incredible in that area. And we had a really good time. My wife, her father had passed away, but we got a chance to be with him during those times. So that was a huge, important milestone for our family. Our kids got a chance to be around their grandmothers more. So once again, it became an incredible blessing to get back to South Dakota.
Yeah, like you said, that second year you guys had 6 wins. Just over a year later, you become the head coach at Alfred State, just outside, well, I think 2 hours away from the Buffalo area, Division III school, had been independent. So, I mean, what was kind of the opportunity? Obviously, being a head coach, but moving out there, getting closer to a place that you had worked at for a year. How excited were you to get that opportunity to kind of lead your first program?
It was really interesting because I had been through quite a few different head coaching interviews and was offered a couple of them. And at this time, I just felt like, I need to take this particular offer. And I was being mentored by our athletic director, who was actually athletic director when I was playing at South Dakota. And so he was like, "Hey, I got a new program. We're going to build something. We want to build it around your idea, your energy, and what have it." And so it was really cool to get back to New York and then be a head coach. I was able to bring Coach Andrew Strobel in, who is now the defensive coordinator in Eastern Illinois. The head coach that I'm working for now, Coach Mike Jasper, actually worked for me for a small period of time at Alfred. My brother Byron, who was a defensive coordinator for me, who had worked at Texas A&M, had came in. So we had a pretty good, strong coaching staff. However, it was a little bit too heavy for me at that time. Right, it was junior college, moving into Division III, and we had what we had.
Independent, right?
Independent, right? We played some cats. Now I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't even know anything about Division III, but we up here playing some teams that I was like, whoa, I didn't even know, this is what it was going to be about. But in the really the 2 years that we really had an opportunity to put things together and try to make it work. It was a heavy load, and I like to say that we left it better than what we found it. When I first got there, it was 22 players on the roster, and I had got there in May, and so, we were out there just, really trying to grab what we could. We did the old Pop Warner tryout, like our first day at camp, where we just said, we don't even know who these kids are. We're going to line them up in groups of 10, and we're going to see how they move.
Just break it down to basics.
Just break it down to basics. Let's see. We don't even know who Johnny is. And so we don't know Johnny. We just know his name, but we don't know if Johnny is an offensive lineman or if he's a DB. So we got to put them in groups of 10 to see how they move. And then we tried to build the roster up. But the main thing I think was what was really important there is we built a community, and we got the football program from being a rough community college to an NCAA. We didn't have a lot of football wins, but we did build people, and we did build a community, and we did set a foundation. So that's what I'm very proud of at Alfred State.
Is there anything, and I ask this all the time, and obviously, again, right, like, being let go and things like that, never great things, but, coaching and having all those constraints, like you mentioned, going from JUCO to Division III, being independent, being up in the Northeast, just you can look at a lot of negatives, but then there's also ways that I think that in those times we might learn more about ourselves and actually improve things that, we've had guests on here, right, that say that they've done the best coaching job they've ever done, and they might have won 2 games, but it might have been their best coaching job they ever did, and people are like, well, you're crazy, you won 2 games, and it's like, well, if you only knew, right, all the stuff I had to deal with and go through, was there anything positive from internally in that program, like coaching-wise, that you feel you look back and you're like, actually, as much as I didn't want to go through that when I went through it, I'm actually glad I did.
Yeah, I think what I really adopted a part of after going through that experience is resilience and conviction. And my family and I, because we all go through it, together. And there was a lot of heavy things that we had to go through, but being convicted on what we believe in and how we will always stay true to the development of people and put people, especially players. I always see myself as I look to empower my players and then be the voice for the voiceless. So when, things happen and I can say, hey, no, these young people, uh, they have a voice, they can do certain things. We should support them in these type of ways. That's my job. That's what I see leadership as, right? If I don't see my players as products. I see them as people, and I want to try to hold true to my promise. And that's what we were talking about. Like, hey, let's just be honest. And like, I got into this in 1998, and this was before coaches was making astronomical money, right? I think Lou Holtz was making $150,000 as a top paid coach when I
Which
got
is
into it.
crazy to think about it, right? Like how different it's been.
Absolutely. So my purpose has stayed the same, and I will support players. And that we just talk about, what I took from it is conviction. I believe in the support of players. I believe in the support of just trying to do the right thing and maintaining doing the right thing, even through times that you need to make sure that you establish conviction in what you believe in.
And then I guess on top of that, how important is, again, the next year you're at Buffalo, so you're back to a place you'd been at before. You're working as an analyst with Coach Lance Leipold, Andy Kolnicki, Jim Zabrowski, all those guys that are now at Kansas. Have a great year, 10-4. I think Tyree Jackson was a part of that team at the time when he was playing quarterback. just how important was that to go from 1 year of like, hey, like I'm being let go, things are not great, to I'm 2 hours away from Buffalo, I'm on staff, and all of a sudden we're having a great year. And I'm kind of like rejuvenated, if you want to say from a wins perspective, right? Like you said, you're still convicted by doing it, but in terms of like having a feel good, bouncing back, like how important was that for you as well in your career?
It was incredibly important, and that was the gift, I say, that the universe had gave me. Like, hey, you're going to be convicted, and you're going to have conviction into what you believe in. But what do I have on the other side? I have on the other side the opportunity for you to grow as a coach and as a leader, because I knew I was missing some things as a head coach. I sat in that seat. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There's some tools in here that I got to develop. And so when Coach Lance Leipold allowed me to come onto the team and I got a chance to sit, listen, and learn, like once you become a head coach, you look at things a lot differently and see how people are handling it, especially once you know there are holes within your arsenal. So sitting there listening to, how he guided his team, and hearing how Andy Kolnicki really seeing offenses and talking to him about how his vision was, which gave me the insight and belief, like, I really appreciate how he thinks about offense. I'm excited about, revamping my career offensively and start to make sure that I become a study and learn these type of things. So that was fantastic. And I can thank Coach Leopold enough for the opportunity that he allowed me to have to be a part of that fantastic program.
Yeah, I love watching, obviously what they've done at Kansas, being that obviously, being here in Wisconsin, right, and understanding what all those guys did and how they just stuck together, and just kind of what special kind of bond and culture that they've built there. Well, as we mentioned at the start of the show, obviously you've been at Stetson over the past year, associate head coach, offense coordinator, quarterbacks coach, everything like that. But prior to that, you spent 5 years at St. Thomas going through, which is interesting. You're talking about the Alfred State transition from JUCO to D3, and you go from D3 to the FCS level, and you guys have a couple really great years there where the 1 year you win the Pioneer League, which you can't qualify for, the NCAA tournament and all that. So you'd mentioned Glenn Caruso's name earlier when you were talking about South Dakota and things like that. And so I guess, being at St. Thomas, kind of back towards the Dakotas that way in the cities, what did you learn from your experience, working wide receivers at St. Thomas?
Marcus, I think that I'm in the Guinness Book of World Records for a coach to transition programs. I have been on 6 different transitional programs, moving from one division to the
Oh
next.
yeah, you said South Dakota earlier, and yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's just been amazing that I'm like, hey, where I go, these things happen. But right along with Coach Leopold, like everything that we've talked about at this point has been, hey, I've been at the front end of growing programs, and what being with Coach Leopold, and I had opportunities to stay, but I wanted to get our family back to the Midwest, and I knew this wasn't going to be we're going to be here for a while because my kids were as far as graduating. So I wanted to be a part of a program that had a lot of success. I wanted to see how programs are built on the other end once they've already established a culture, a winning identity, those type things. And so that's why I went back with Coach Caruso, and plus, his wife and my wife are like really best friends. Go back and see how you build the program for the long haul. And what an incredible experience did I learn about the development, the organization, the structure on how to build that program for the long haul. They had just went to 2 national championships in 5 years, so that was incredible. And then once I get there, and we there for a couple of years, and the next thing I know, we're going up to Division 1. I look at my wife, I'm like, hey, it must be us.
Have you ever thought about writing a book on, just being a part of all that? Because again, it's, we've seen some different parallels with guests on this podcast before that have just, kind of unique things where there's interlocking things that you could have never predicted in their career. But to have that, I mean, have you ever thought about writing just a piece on like what you've seen from all that? Because again, I think there's probably, again, levels are different, right? Like whether it's JUCO to D3, D3 to FCS, all the different types of things, you're talking about D2 to FCS, like there's probably some parallels that you've seen or could obviously offer advice to staffs or coaches of like, hey, we've been through this before. Here's what we did, whether it worked well or it didn't work well, right?
The book is called Coaching with My Boots On. That's what I'm going to call it, because all the times we had to be in the snow and work ourselves all the way up, Marcus. And I'm going to have some snow boots right there, right? You're gonna know exactly what I'm talking
For
about. Yeah,
sure.
that's in the works. We're working on that, the beginning phases of it. But that is definitely something that I believe my journey, and the same thing that you're doing, right? You're giving people opportunities to share, learn, to be encouraged, to let everyone know that we go through things, and to learn from other people's wisdom. So yeah, that is definitely something that's in the works.
That's awesome. You talked obviously a lot about your family. What's your family meant to you, obviously, and the crazy journeys that, coaches share on this podcast, and obviously having the family behind them. What has it meant from your wife and your kids' standpoint of, being troopers, of moving around and kind of following the dream?
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to shed a tear right now, because that's kind of where I would be. No, my hero between my mother and my wife is just I'm in awe of the strength and encouragement that my wife Shannon has shared with me. Like right now, I left in January to come down here, and she's holding the fort down. Like we have three teenage daughters. We have an older daughter, but we got three teenage daughters at home that are in college, and she's holding it down, and so much encouragement, right? And so the partners of coaches are the true heroes and allow us to go and do our passion and to develop people. So, and then my children, this was a family decision once they knew that, their father had an opportunity to go be a Division 1 offensive coordinator, right? And as we know, it just doesn't happen that often. So me being able to take this and develop this program, and to influence and to continue to do my passion in life, it had to be a family. So Kendall, Jalen, Lorray, and Mariah, they all poured in and said, "Dad, you got to go do this. We're going to support you all the way through." And our coach allows me to shoot home, so I'm home often, right? I'm home often, and we just got off a vacation, and my honeydew list was like, I don't know, like a mile long. So yeah, it's been a family decision, and we said the next moves are going to be about family, not just about me or football, and it had to be consensus, and we came to that decision, even though it's a tough decision, but we came to that decision that this would happen at this time.
I love that. You talked a lot about different reflection points, right? Because obviously over your career, I think it's easy 1 year to the next, to 5 years to 10 years. You look back and what seems like 10 years ago seems like yesterday, but there's different mistakes or things you learn or techniques or whatever it is, right? Like, how do you kind of get better and even just kind of keep track of things that you've learned along the way or mistakes you made or whatever, right? Like, how do you kind of grow as a person?
Well, my wife would tell you I got like
Is it based,
10,000
is it
notes.
based off of the honey-do list and how much gets done? And that's whether you're actually growing or not?
Well, that part, like, hey, do I understand how this whole thing works, right? That's the first part, right? But really, if we go back, it is making sure and understand. That's what I would say. I like, I have to speak spiritually, that we have been placed in certain places for reasons. And once I matured and understood that it wasn't about me, that it was about my entire family, how things happen, I became more humble and less bitter about the results of how things ended. And it been more about, nope, let's focus, because you have a gift now. So my wife was recently a finalist for Teacher of the Year in the state of Minnesota.
Wow.
And then my daughters have incredibly flourished in their own ways. I mean, just doing magnificent things. So, why those things ended the way they did and how they get to where they need to get to, I'm really humbled, and I try to be observant and patient into what happens next for us. Just like right now, like how we got here and this opportunity. Yeah, it wasn't a great season, but we did end up breaking a bunch of records last year. But what we are building now, we're super excited, and what we're doing to develop our players around us and the community. Oh my goodness, it is pretty fascinating.
No, I love to hear that. Well, I appreciate you joining the podcast, sharing your story. I mean, again, just the growth patterns. What I love too is how you come back around to whether it's South Dakota, or Buffalo, or different places where you've been and kind of coming back around again. I think that's really cool. And so I just honestly appreciate your time. I know camp's going to be rolling here pretty soon. Season's going to be going, and obviously wish you guys the best of luck at Stetson this season and obviously seasons to come.
Once again, thank you for what you're doing. You're doing a lot for the community and giving people a voices. So you're doing a great job, and I appreciate you, brother.